Yes, we are
We're
live.
live.
How are you,
Hi.
Megan?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. It's been a long day, but it's okay. It's Monday. So
Yeah,
get,
Monday.
getting at the end
Yeah.
of the week. So today, what are we gonna discuss? We are discussing uh, musical readings. Yeah. So how do you wanna start this conversation?
I mean, I think we had talked about talking about I guess a two for one, like both our approaches to instrumentation and orchestration,
Uh
and
huh.
then also um reading sessions and what reading sessions is, maybe our approaches to reading sessions. So I mean, I guess I can start. Like, I know for me, I think of sound in a very physical way. Um,
The instrumentation, you mean, right?
yes, and I always did. I mean, my main instrument is French horn. It's a really physical instrument. I was always thinking about like those kind of physical properties. Um, I was always kind of thinking about how to change the sounds. And then
Just a parenthesis. I find it really interesting, if not bizarre, that your instrument is the horn because most of the repertoire for the horn is orchestra based, is
uh
very
huh,
classically
it is.
based. You don't have that much. You don't have. I haven't heard a piece. I would say in a contemporary style like ever. I don't
Um,
know. There must exist a bit
there are a
here
couple.
and there. Yeah,
Ligety has a pretty. It's. I mean, I guess Ligady's not
Ligeti.
super new yet. Yeah, Ligety has a really really great horn concerto.
Yeah,
Um,
he's
yeah.
already. I will consider him already to be in the canon,
He also
like a
has a good
classical
horn trio too. For
horn
yeah,
trio.
so he yeah for oh man, why can't I? It's piano. I think it's I want to say it's piano, violin, and horn, but my mind's blanking. It could be piano, cello, and horn. Let me Google it. Yeah, it's piano. Yeah, I was right. But it's violin, horn, and piano. Um, so
So
yeah,
there's that.
yeah. But I mean, it might be in a way like I think I got, and I love playing in orchestra. I love that kind of repertoire.
Oh,
As a listener,
It's from 1982. I see
yeah,
why. I don't know it. Yeah, because it's from his later period. I don't know
yeah.
much about his later period. Yeah.
It's
Okay.
yeah, it's one of the smartest pieces written for horn, in my opinion. Most of the time, when people do try to write for horn, they write pretty badly for it. But anyways, yeah. So I
Yeah.
think maybe my experience playing in orchestra, um, I do, and I still love playing in orchestra. I love listening to traditional orchestral repertoires, but I also kind of was really immersed in like the intensity and the competitive edge, and I think maybe I was rebelling as a composer. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, so I think
That makes
and then
sense.
when I was at Northwestern, I took a instrumentation class, and that in this particular instrumentation class was all about the like really the physics of sound, and so we were always looking at sound waves.
Hmm.
We were like comparing sound waves of like, for example, we might compare a sound wave of a violin bow at like normal bow placement versus like saltesto or salpot. And we do, I mean, all these comparisons.
That's
We'd
like a
have to like,
spectral analysis and stuff like
yeah,
that.
it was
Okay,
completely
so
spectral. We'd have
yeah,
to mess with spectrograms to like actually to change one sound to another sound. Try to get something. Take one instrument, try to make it sound as much like another instrument by just messing with the spectrogram a little bit. And the idea was to really understand the way sound functioned. And like we actually create. I mean, I think I have it somewhere. Somewhere I have it. Like we created like an actual orchestration book, and it's all like sound waves, and it's thick. Um, from just
Mhm.
one course, and yeah, so that was really amazing thinking, and the whole idea is
I
that
would
when
have
you really
liked to take that.
understand. Yeah, I mean it was amazing. The whole idea is that when you study instrumentation that way versus like studying like the Sam Adler orchestration book, which I have, and I definitely studied that,
I think
but
I have it somewhere around here. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
I do
Go
too.
on, go on.
But like I
Yeah,
think when you
I took my classical instrumentation classes, like both,
yeah
and in Buffalo it wasn't that classical. We kind of analyzed pieces, if I remember correctly. I
yeah
think we
we
took this
did
class.
we
cor-
did you take it
Together.
with the Saddleman one?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it was in class. I think they did a mixture of contemporary and I think we did do some of like I think we did. I remember doing W.C. Lemaire. Might have done Rite of Spring. So
You
we
have
did
a
do some conventional
much
repertoire.
better memory than I do because I don't remember.
I
I
remember
remember
doing Lemaire.
Asenakis piece. I remember Horace from
Yeah.
Senaki.
So I mean, we did. Yeah. So this class then the idea is that if you learn Sam Adler's book or whatever, you can understand what other composers have done with different instruments. But if you actually learn the the physical sound waves and be able to translate those to sound, well, then you can start to understand sounds that haven't been written. Um, and
Hmm.
so that was really exciting to me, and I think I really approach instrumentation that way. Even when I'm like building my own instruments, I will think that way, and I do think I've developed a really good ear for timbre. Um, it's very it's very rare that a timbre, especially of a conventional instrument, surprises me, even
Hmm.
if I'm making up new techniques. Other things will sometimes, but yeah. So I think that's, I guess, the main way I, I approach instrumentation. I like to, I do like we talked about it
So
last week
it's
about like,
the physical plus
yeah,
the spectra.
and we talked about last week like the idea of like starting with a piano reduction and
Uh-huh.
going to orchestra, which is something. I mean, I guess I did it when I was very young, but I haven't done it in probably 20 years. Um, and so, because when I write a piece, if I write a piece for an instrument, it
Do
is
you
like
see the
for that
banner there?
instrument.
Would you describe it like that way? The way you see a timbre,
Yeah,
physical
I mean,
plus
I think
spectra
well, I
in a
mean,
way?
yeah,
It's a
I think
very
I think of the
northwestern
timbre.
thing then, possibly.
I think it
If
was
you don't,
I think it was Northwestern from my day at Northwestern. I think Northwestern is not the same place it was. I think it has its own personality now, because there's a completely different faculty. But I think from my little slice of when I was there from 2006 to 2010.
hmm hmm
So yeah, so it was like from my little slice of it. Yeah, and I think yeah. So when I write for an instrument, a lot of times I do like if I have a lot of instruments that I like to explore on,
I've seen
and
some of your videos with strings on your YouTube
yeah, so
channel,
I
right?
mess around. Yeah, I think I had examples that were related to a piece of mine, and I mess around with things, and I try to write an instrument if it's for that instrument, not something that could just be like tossed to different instruments. Um, I
Yeah.
yeah, I have like one piece I had talked about that um, it was a commission from the pre-college conservatory I work at, where they had a melody that was written by students, and they wanted me to write a chamber music piece. I think for piano trio, they wanted a version for a string quartet and a version for a woodwind quintet.
hmm
And I think that was kind of a cool challenge because I write four instruments. I think I started with either. I think I might have started with the piano trio version, and I wrote the piece with the melody from the students for that, and then I kind of arranged it, but the arrangements weren't like a one-to-one translation. They were very much like the same melody, the same formal structure, but it was like very much a new piece for each ensemble. That was the way because that's just the way I think. I think for the instruments, um, I
I can
I
relate to
love instrumentation. I love looking at the instruments. I love fiddling around with instruments, even if I'm not like if I have an instrument that I don't have or I'm not playing, I'm still like air playing it. Like I'm always doing the brass for the wind and brass. I'm feeling like how with in string instruments. Like I don't play string instruments, but like I'm pretty aware of like the size of the notes. So I'm like thinking how far would that feel to be spaced. So I'm kind of thinking of the physical nature, which goes into my artistic expression, obviously, but it also just in terms of helping me understand the sound, it helps as well.
well, how do I see instrumentation? I will say that we're kind of similar. We see it in a similar manner in the way
Uh-huh.
that I have only written exercises for my instrumentation or orchestration classes where you can exchange the notes between instruments. But I kind of like, probably it's because of the music that I like, because I tended to like more of the, if you divide like orchestration between the German style and the French style, I usually go with the French style, which is which focuses more on timbre and stuff like that. And I also, my teachers always push me to think of the instrument, to think of the physicality, but not the physical way that they are played. Think of how they are constructed, the thickness, like a C2 on a double bass, for example. It's even if you write it pianissimo, is gonna have all of this spectra emanating from
Mm-hmm.
it and all of this resonance. So instrumentation in that way, I would say that, yeah, I think that it's not interchangeable. That it has. I will say that instrumentation equals individuality in many ways. So
Mm-hmm.
and it, but it wouldn't be like from your point of view. Your point of view is like the scientific one, coming from spectrograms and from the physical aspects in it, but the physical aspects in the way in which they are played, in the way that you can play them, and how that translates like movement, like literally movement into sound. I will see them more like colors. Yeah, I don't know if I have synesthesia or no or not, but I will say that I have always related sounds to colors in some sense.
Okay.
So that aspect, in that way,
And not
instrumentation,
it's
yeah,
not pitches to you relate like timbres to colors or pitches to colors.
timbres,
Okay.
yeah, particularly timbres. No pitches, no, not that much. Probably that's why I don't give that much importance to exact pitches, more like the contour, or more like the register, or more like the gesture, let's say. But I see where you're coming from. Like, um, I don't see myself writing like interchangeable music, for example, in
Mm-hmm.
a way that the back did, to mention just somebody.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
that
it was
takes
an interesting challenge for me. It might be interesting for you, like to actually make different versions, but it was, it was.
at this point, would you make it at this point in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I made it just a couple
You
years
think
ago.
so? Okay.
But it was I didn't think they were like this is the same piece. To me, it was like maybe they were like the same structures, but they were like in completely different languages. So like if you had a poem and you had it in, Spanish and English and French, it would have a very different sound in all
Yes.
those languages. And it would also have a little bit of a different meaning a lot of times because a lot of times translations aren't one to one. Um,
Never.
so, I
Yeah.
mean,
They are
yeah.
never one to one. Never. never ever.
So yeah.
I would say
So like that's how I kind of envisioned. That's how I went forth being able to do that project, thinking like it was like that
because
they weren't
with
just
your
versions of each other. They
instrument,
weren't different.
even with your instrument, with a horn, if you try to translate it, let's say to a trumpet, that
Mhm.
it will never sound. It's a totally different. I get a different color out of it. Like
Yeah,
I would say
it's a different
that the
color for sure.
trumpet is more red in a way. It's more piercing, if you
It's
want to
way more.
describe
It's
it.
way brighter for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And even if you put a mute on it, whereas
But
the
it depends on the register, though. I think low trumpet is very like I don't know, bland and like thick. I don't if that makes sense.
that's how I visualize the horn, actually, more throughout,
Bland.
kind of more rounded, not thick, but round,
Yeah,
a rounder
more.
sound. Probably I try to imagine the spectral or the wave or the
And yeah, I think
spectrogram.
the horn timbre changes really a lot through the register. I think it has like the really high register is very like
Like the
intense and thin, and then I think kind of the middle high register is like your typical like soloistic soaring kind of horn sound, and
yeah
then the kind of middle like kind of bottom of the treble clef is kind of like your most I think boring horn sound, kind of no not a lot of characteristics, and then when you're really low you get that kind of um the really low sounds that it can go as low as the tuba, but it has a much more thinness and warmness um,
okay,
in
that's
that
how
register.
I like the way you described it. Yeah, because the horn at the same time has this pretty big register, pretty large register
Uh-huh.
for a brass instrument at the
I mean,
same
but
time.
I think it's kind of true of most instruments. I feel like most instruments, if you take like just the kind of low, like dead middle or sometimes low middle of the instrument, it's like the least character of the instrument.
But all of
A
this,
lot
we
of
are like, and this kind of links into the next topic. Like, we imagine how they are going to sound, and
mm-hmm.
it seems like you have a better idea of how it ends up sounding in the overall form to a reading in a reading session. Let's say I need a reading
Yeah,
session for see what works within the larger uh, scheme of things. Say, uh, and then I can revise in a more precise manner or chirurgical manner, you might say.
yeah. I
And
mean,
yeah,
I certainly think like my very favorite way to work is working really closely to the musicians, where they're just constantly reading your music in progress, and you can just really experiment because you can
but
edit really things really closely. Um,
that's when you
I
have
love
them
working that way.
available. That's when you have them
Yep,
available.
yeah. It's
And,
not always the
and
case.
yeah,
It's
that's the ideal way.
yes, that's what I'm
And
saying. It's the idea.
and for me it will be too. It has been too, like, working back and forth. Hey, does this work for you? What do you think? Even if at times, well, when I try to venture on the guitar, on the classical guitar, towards more adventurous sounds, let's say, or gestures or territory or whatever, I tend to consult with guitar players, with advanced guitar players, with people that have made their bachelor and their masters and play all day, like 12-hour practice, 8 hours a day, etc., etc. Because I want to see the upper performer's perspective on what I'm writing. Like, if it's practical in a way, if they think it works, if it's gonna sing, if my intention is gonna come through, is what
Yeah,
it comes down to.
but I mean, I guess for me, like readings. So readings are mostly something that students have and young composers have. Um, and oftentimes they're at least formalized readings. I guess sometimes we have readings like that aren't formalized, that is just like somebody offers to, play through a piece in progress or hear a
But
couple sounds.
also, what are we considering a reading? Like are we considering a reading just student readings that a famous group is going to come over and play a serious
Yeah.
concert, and they get a piece from students and they have to read it to get out of the way so they make the teacher over there happy? Or are we also including like, let's say, we reuniting with a performer, or the performers like a week or two or 1 month or throughout the process of composition? What
Yeah,
would
I
you
mean, I
say?
think I don't know. I mean, I think when we first addressed the concept, I the first thing that comes to mind are these like structured reading sections that are usually, professional musicians that come in for students. But in a sense, I do think like if I'm working with a musician and I'm going through and they're literally reading through part of my piece in progress. I feel like that's a reading too. It's just not as formalized reading. Um, yeah, but I feel like the
So,
formalized readings are like, yeah, when you have like, like the ones in Buffalo, we had like whatever ensemble came, and we had tons of different ensembles. We had like Jack String Quartet, we had Nirvat and Neo, we had Diddy did some readings in June of Buffalo. We had, tons of different ones, and they would come and they would just literally read your piece, and then you would make a recording. Usually, it was fairly quickly, like you didn't get no more than a half an hour usually in the piece. Um,
but at these readings, what I find like not fascinating, but kind of like looking back on them, is that they usually ask the composer like, do you want it like played like this or like this? And you also had to be ready. You also had to
yeah.
have like the gesture in mind, the physicality. How did you want them to play it in your head? You couldn't just write
Mm-hmm.
something and give it to them, and just give it to them arbitrarily. Just deal with that. For example, it's like, they usually wanted to see what was in your head, what was going through your head. They also, at some of the readings, not readings, but at some other places, festivals and stuff, performing my music, when we were practicing, the pianist will ask me, okay, so what is this piece about? What is the How did you compose it? What was the main idea? How did you
Mm-hmm.
come about doing them? So the performers are also interested in the composing process, so they could get the performance better, even if it's at this level of readings, that
Yeah.
it's just reading a piece and nothing else. No,
I
not
mean,
not
I
super.
think I associate like readings, especially the formalized readings, with younger composers. Um, and that usually, and they're really important, I think, for younger composers. Um, I've had I've had some. I mean, had some bad experience with readings too, but I've had some really great experiences that really shaped the way I was. And sometimes for younger players, that's really the only time you ever get to hear your music is in these reading sessions, because oftentimes they don't have very like performances, and they're still building relationships with performers. So sometimes like the reading session is the life of the piece. And I think that's how I always treated reading sessions as a student. Like I don't think I treated them differently than a first performance, because um, I mean, I always hoped that my piece would get a performance and go on, but sometimes I knew that it was possible that it wouldn't, and this would be, whatever we created in the reading session in this recording would be this piece that
It
I,
would be it.
spent
Yeah.
at least 2 months on, or more depending on the piece. Yeah, and I try to think about which ones I've had. I've gone to festivals, but I haven't really done festivals that offered readings. Most of them were like rehearsals and performances.
I,
June in
that's
Buffalo
what I'm
had some readings, but I didn't do one of the readings at June in Buffalo.
that's what I'm referring to, because I'm kind of I see readings, I kind of extend the term. You are only talking about student readings, formal
Mhm.
readings, but I kind of think of readings like also rehearsals, uh, rehearsals before a piece, or working back and forth. Like you are halfway through a piece and you give it to a performer. Hey, what do you think of this? uh,
Yeah,
probably it has to do that I revise a piece after a reading. After those readings that you are referring to, I usually revise them. I didn't see them as final. I didn't.
like the formal readings you're talking about.
Yes, yes. I will have to make a difference there. When of what you're talking about, and then like rehearsals, and then like even some first performances, I told you, like I see them as readings that I will later get revised, because what's the definition of reading? For me, it would be like the first time that you really get a sense of what your piece is gonna sound like on stage, of how your piece is gonna sound in an overall form, from
Mhm.
start to finish. uh, Even if they stop and stuff, halfway through or on this spot and all, you get a recording, and you can get that
Yeah.
recording and piece it together, and finally get to listen to it, to your piece from start to finish, right?
Uh-huh.
So I guess my definition of a musical reading is broader than yours in that sense. But if we're gonna
Mhm.
stick with the
Well, I think
more
we also
formal
have
one,
different editing
yes,
strategies. Like for me, when
yes,
I'm writing a piece, I am constantly editing it, like what I did the day before, like almost obsessively. So, um, but once I get and I have a personality, I can get addicted to things super easily. I can get obsessed with things super easily. It's I have really bad anxiety a lot of times. Like I can get into a lot of head spaces that I'm really mentally un sound, and I've had to kind of learn a lot of things that like I can do, and some things that are just really not healthy for me. And one thing is like I just have to let a piece go at a certain point. So I do it obsessively, but once I draw that final bar line and I give it to players, like whether it be for a first performance or a reading, I rarely will edit the piece after that. It's basically it's done. um and I think, yeah, if I whatever I learn from the piece, a lot of times I just kind of continue it on to a new piece. um Rather, I'm trying to think if there's any occasions where I can remember editing after a first performance. I remember in Liaison. With Liaison, I've never written a piece so close to the premiere. I think the ending of the piece was probably written within 24 hours of the premiere. I mean, we really were putting it together still at the very end. Um, I don't think any of the material changed after the premiere at all. I do think I think we changed stuff about this. Like, we just got better at the setup. And so we had better techniques about it. Wasn't like a different setup, but we found more ways about getting more accurate with the setup. Um, Things like that, but it's not wasn't so that I guess it was edit some sort of edit, but it wasn't really an edit to the piece. I had another occasion that was in 2015. Um, I wrote a piece for a trio in ICE. I was a faculty member at Walden. They were
what would
coming to
you
do a concert
say
there.
is the final version of Liaison? Like I can see here at least one,
I
four,
mean,
four
I mean
performances,
all
or
the performances.
three performances, and recording at least.
I mean, I think the premiere, the premiere was the June and Buffalo premiere. That was the first time it was ever played. I think, and I think that was
2013.
a final. Yeah, 2013. Yes. So
Okay.
I think that was a finalized version. I think we got better at the technical setup for sure. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it got. And a lot of the performances are very different, but they're different just because the there's a lot of
It's
indeterminacy in the instrument.
yeah, it's gonna be a different
It's
every time.
not it's not like our intentions were necessarily different.
Unless
We had
she
like a lot of
starts,
physical determinants.
unless you get a robot that moves the same all the time, like yeah.
I know. I mean, she got better. Like there was certain sounds like that we liked that like we tried to just make sure like there was this like one like little like popping clicking sound that we really liked, and we tried to make scenarios where we couldn't really control exactly when it was going to happen. We tried to make scenarios so that it would emerge at some point like within a section, um, and so we got better at like kind of controlling things like that. But I think she was pretty good because that piece had such a long work process. I mean, we worked on the piece for 2 years before the premiere. So I mean, I think even by the premiere, she was pretty good at that. I think she got more confident. One of the later performances, I think in New York, she actually broke her leg off of the
Ouch.
contraption.
Is that the one that
Um,
says Maga Mata Festival?
yes. So,
Okay.
so there it definitely had a life and a journey after, but it felt like we were just kind of working with what I already had done, and it kind of felt like I was more part of like the performance team rather than like a composer. I'm at that point, but yeah, I did have a piece for Walden, and I didn't, and it was for no, it wasn't a trio, it was a duo. It was for alto sax mouthpiece and flute head joint. And it's a really like it's a fun piece. It was called Respiration Games, and it's a really like quirky little piece that I wrote for this student summer camp. And the original had a lot of playing and singing in it, and the saxophonist could not do it like at all, and there was like a lot of it in there. And it was probably the day before the premiere, and the flute player could do it pretty well, but she was also a singer. She was just happened to be a vocalist, flautist, and she could do it pretty well. The saxophonist couldn't do it really at all, and so it was just really the rehearsals were going really awful, and so like I basically had to stay up all night and like rewrite the piece, or kind of completely edit it because that was like pretty much the main sound of the piece, and it just wasn't working. Um,
Okay.
so I did edit it, but that was like after a rehearsal, so
But
like
those
that
are
was a
kind
really
of
big edit.
very specific ones. Like
Yeah.
no, it's not your
Um,
MO.
it's not the way I work, and I know a lot of people work that way. I remember our colleague Nathan. He
Uh-huh.
often would get he often would take on like 2 or 3 like reading like formalized readings in Buffalo with different groups that maybe had some overlapping instrumentation and have like the same piece read, and he would like the first one would have like a section, and then he rewrite it, and then he'd have it played again, and he really worked that way, and
I mhm.
I could see like, and you could see the progression, and it really worked well for his music and his
Like
thinking.
he polish it more and more. It's like a
Hmm.
craftsman or an artisan, an artisan.
Yeah.
It would be a good comparison. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's different. For me, I will get okay. It's like I have the concept, I have the idea, I have the piece on paper. I can imagine it. I can read it through, but I don't know. Probably it's because of the way I think about music. Probably because of the many sections. Probably it's because of what I told you, the weight of the sections that I cannot really calculate in time. Like, is this section gonna have the same weight as this other one in musical time, for example?
Hmm.
Um, and it's not until I listen to the piece a first time that I can get a really good idea, and then I have to listen to it a couple of times after, to get to grasp it, to really grasp it and let it grow, let's say, inside me. And then I do a big revision, and then that's gonna be it, because I totally get what you say. I cannot live with a piece with the rest of my life. It's kind of a snapshot. A piece is what's a piece?
Yeah.
It's a snapshot of a period
Oh,
of
for
your
sure.
journey, as a composer, as an
I think
artist.
it's for me. It's very similar. Like for people who like journal, for me, it's very similar. I definitely
Yes.
associate pieces with very specific times in my life, and I associate things that were happening in my life with the pieces too.
Yeah, it's like you cannot carry them over and over. It's
Hmm.
like, even if you see a piece of yours from an undergrad, let's say, uh I wouldn't change it right now. Why? Because it represented how I was
Hmm.
thinking back then, and
I agree.
it kind
I,
of
I still personally love some of my pieces from undergrad, even though
you see
they're
the
very different.
errors. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I still love them. Like, I love them for what it was and what the experience is. I still enjoy them as pieces of music. Maybe they're not as maybe profound as other pieces of art. I don't know, but like, and they're not exactly. I think there's definitely you can see how those pieces led into what I do now. I don't. I think there's definitely a lineage, but they're not exactly what I do now either. So I don't know. I love them for what they represent, I guess.
okay. So, what would you say in relation to the instrumentation? Is it the same? In what way? Well, what I mean is, like, when you are writing a piece, when you write a piece for a reading, let's say, is it the same effective? Does each instrumentation have the same effectiveness with you, like writing for a string quartet as you would for a,
Oh
I
no,
don't know, no, not at
I
all.
would write. Well,
Or-
I would write every for every instrument completely different. I feel like, um, and I think
but
I
then how will it differ? How will each reading differ then in that each particular situation
um,
according to the instrumentation?
I mean, I don't know if the reading would differ per se, but I just think my approach would differ more. And there's definitely instrumentations I get more excited about. I think a lot of it is I'm probably, even though I'm a horn player, I'm most comfortable writing for strings and percussion. I feel really comfortable writing for those instruments. And I other some
Probably
little
it's
wind and brass.
wouldn't you say that it's because of the experiences we've had with percussionists? Every
I think
composer
that's
kind
part
of
of
like
it. Yeah,
is
I
kind
think
of
it's also for
psychological.
me. For me, what I at least tell myself, I'm sure a lot of it is that for sure, but it's like they're very physical instruments. Like you can see the sound being produced, both in string instruments, and they're visually physical. Because like I play horn, which is such a physically demanding instrument, but it's not
But at the same,
super
you don't see,
visual.
no,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I think that is one of
you
my
cannot
call,
see
and
a lot. No,
I love
you
that
never.
like percussion is to me is like all about invention of new sounds and like the percussionists love that. Like they love when you find a new way to use one of their instruments or find material at Home Depot and give it to them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that my approach is the way I write pieces. I'm definitely thinking of the instrument. If I was told to write a piece for an instrumentation and then like a month later, I was told that that instrumentation was totally going to change, I basically have to start over. Um,
Well,
I could just
yeah,
be like, oh, I can adapt that piece for that. It wouldn't work. And
it
I
kind of
don't
seems
like.
obvious to me, but now that I think about it, it wouldn't be obvious to anybody, to or to half composers, or to a lot of composers, or to most composers. What would you say? Hmm. I have
I
to
don't
think
know.
about that now.
I mean, and I think. I mean, it depends. Like me, I don't know. I'm like maybe if it was like, oh, there was a viola and they can only have a violin, I would still probably have to edit it, but maybe I wouldn't have to 100% toss it. I don't know. Depends. But like if it was like violin to flute, I probably would have to start for it. Even
Yeah, I
though they're the
totally
same
get you.
registers, you know. Um,
It also depends on the techniques you're using, but as you are a very physical composer, let's say, or a
mhm,
physical minded composer, would be a better way to express it. uh yeah, like extended techniques, so-called extended techniques, are really part
mhm,
of your language. It's part of the
mhm.
language. So extended techniques are those things that cannot be translated from one instrument to another, except
What?
probably in strings, but between the same families, and some, and to some degree, because even like in wind instruments, playing uh, breathy sounds, aeolian sounds, let's say, it
Mhm.
wouldn't be the same, or it wouldn't have the same effectiveness with every instrument. uh, I remember discussing.
Yeah. I mean, even before, like, so I didn't write any extended techniques till I was in college. I didn't really know that existed. Like, it wasn't a world I knew about. And um, but I remember my very first composition teacher when I was like probably around 11. Was a composer. He passed away like probably a decade ago. Robert Ian Winston, and
Just so
he
people
was
know, extended techniques are unorthodox ways to play an instrument. So if I
so
spit
he.
into a flute, or produce a breathy sound in a flute that is not very flute-like, but I use it musically, or if I
Mhm.
press the strings of a violin very harshly, so that I get a harsh sound, what we call a scratch tone,
Scratch tone, yeah.
some stuff like that is what I'm referring to with uh, extended
Yeah.
technique.
But yeah,
Uh,
he really discouraged me. So when I was I started composing pretty much as soon as I taking piano lessons at 7, and I started composing, but it was mostly a lot of it was improv, and then I started kind of having the same constructing pieces that I would play again, but it would be like mostly piano at that point when I was really little, and then I started kind of expanding it, and then um, my first composition teacher, Robert Winston, he was very adamant that if I was going to write a piece that was not for piano, I should not be writing it on the piano, because if I were to write it on the piano, I would write it very pianistically and probably pick things that fell nicely under my hands. But what falls nicely on my hands under the piano doesn't necessarily make for a
that's
good like viola part.
no, and even
You know?
with a similar instrument, you might say that's arranged the same, like a marimba. You can, if what's the usual advice, or that percussionists tell composers, like, use, if you're gonna use the piano, use them like this. It's gonna be
Mm-hmm.
more like we use the mallets, for example,
Yeah.
using the pinky and the thumb, like
Did you
only
ever do you
those.
did you ever write like on piano like one instrument for other instruments?
I use the piano, but I use it for harmonies, and for
So
like
not for
having
yeah
a
for
point of
string.
reference, but not
Yeah.
really. um
Yeah. Yeah.
like for using the guitar for a melodic line for a violin, no, not really.
Yeah.
I
Yes. I
never
mean.
but that goes back to what I used to listen to. It's like I always saw the orchestra. It goes back to orchestra music. To that I saw orchestra music more in the, if you're gonna divide it in the French versus the German way, where more in the French way.
Hmm.
That
Well, and
each
so
instrument has its own individuality. Timbre
yeah,
is very important. Like there's a reason why spectralism came out of France, right? I would say.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think for, and also, I was also very much discouraged from a young age from using MIDI as a tool.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm like very, very thankful for it now. I think it, but between the two, I think it developed my sense of originality and also my sense of ear for timbre. Um, and I mean, I see especially young composers now because MIDI is so much. It wasn't wrong when I was a kid, but
No,
it's
it
so
sounded.
much
Oh, yeah, yeah.
more easy to get access to. You know, it's so much more easy to get. It's such a crutch, especially for some of the talented, like really young composers I come across. Like they get to a point where it just such a crutch, and
MIDI
then
are computer generated sounds.
yeah. So
If you play an orchestra on the computer, like that's gonna be
and the
MIDI.
piano becomes a crutch too. I definitely have students that you know they write pieces and you can see that they wrote on the piano because they were all the things are very easy to play in the piano, and but they're not necessarily easy for these other instruments. For example, like arpeggios
Hmm.
are pretty easy. They're very easy to play in the piano, but a lot of other instruments they're not super idiomatic to play
The
arpeggio
marimba,
after arpeggio.
try playing a third on the higher register. No, it's not really practical. It's easier to play the fifth
Yeah.
in a way.
Um,
Like you
but
can't
I see,
tell it that way.
and then
Uh-huh.
students so much that like they they write their piece on Sibelius or Finale and they press play and they think okay this sounds great, um, but the thing that
But there's
MIDI
a problem with there's a very
oh
big,
there's such a big problem and
yeah.
I tell it but like it's like a crutch and it's really hard to convince a young composer to not use it because I understand that it's like you work for a lot of hours and it feels like an instant gratification for them and
Okay.
especially in today's society they're really into instant
Hmm.
that they can hear it and they think oh this sounds great and then they're shocked when it doesn't sound like that in real life because I think the one thing that I mean there's a lot of things that MIDI does poorly but I think the thing that's the maybe its biggest flaw is it's really really hard to tell the individual lines
Hmm.
on MIDI. They all kind of
Oh,
just
because
blend.
it goes back to what I was talking about, like the physicality of the instrument, but not the physical way you play them, the physical, how they are constructed. Like
Yeah,
a horn, a trumpet, the brass section is always gonna be a brass section over
yeah,
all the orchestra, for example.
yeah.
You kind of don't get that with MIDI. With MIDI,
Oh, definitely.
it's
That's
like
another problem.
it's like if they were part of the same family, even like they melt so well together in MIDI. For
But I mean, even if a player is just like a young composer is just trying to make like a Bach chorale kind of sounding thing with
Mhm.
like strings, they don't get the sense like they get the overall sounds, but in real life, it's not just chord, 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 chord. There's these four lines that are coming together, and we can hear the chords, but we can
But
actually hear how notes move from one to another in each individual line.
yeah,
Um, and MIDI doesn't communicate that very well.
I see what you mean. But what I mean is more about the thickness of the sound and the
Oh yeah,
thinness of the sound. For example, the voice. A soprano is not gonna sound the same around the full register. You were talking about the horn. MIDI makes it
hmm
sound, gives you the illusion that the whole range of the horn
oh
is the
yeah.
same. It's like Huh.
Well, and
You
it's
kind
a
of
difference
lose
too.
that.
Like
And
even
that's
when
part of the
you're
importance of readings too, because you are
mhm,
there. Like that's
like
why
I'm
I
reading
always revise
a
after
string
reading.
quartet reading for very very young composers that
Okay.
are very beginners in a week, and one of the things that's hard for them to understand is like, so we have first violin, second violin, viola, cello. Why? Like then they think as default, like the first violin also always has to have the highest note. Then the second violin has the second highest note. The viola is the third, and the cello and they don't
Hmm.
like they don't understand timbre enough yet to know like if you go in the high register of the cello, it's not the same as like the low register of the violin. Um,
Oh, yeah.
it's a
Okay.
very,
Yeah.
very different sound. That like high
Yeah.
register of the cello
Very,
is going to be
very.
a
Yeah.
much more intense, like soloistic kind of sound
And
than
the
playing on the G
pressure
string.
and how Shelleys react to that register also is another factor. It's like they
Mhm.
not just speak about intensity. When they
Yeah,
go down there, they usually go with more intensity. They don't go like
yeah,
pianissimo with a pianissimo mind or anything like that with a okay with a subtle passage mind. No, if we're going
yeah,
down there, we're going down there to we mean business, for example.
yeah. The
And it
psychology of music is so important too. You're right.
yeah, and it's like even if you don't notate it as sub ponticello, for me it always sounds it kind of yields that sound, that partial sound, that harmonics sound around that register in the cello, for example.
Hmm.
Uh, well, at least for me. But yeah, you're
Yeah,
definitely right. It's like
but
you wouldn't use that register as an experienced composer in a non-climactic way, or at least if you in a
yeah,
in a subtle passage, I will say you will use it more in a climax or a loud passage or a let's say a more, I don't want to say disorganized, but a more activity based passage, let's say,
for
or
sure.
unstable passage. Like all of those adjectives that that just came out of the top of my head. You cannot get that with nor with MIDI nor just by if you are
No.
unexperienced and you just write them on the piano. And you don't get a reading and you haven't worked with string players and you don't know about strings, you cannot get them without that either. So the
Yeah.
importance of readings for students is very, very, it goes way beyond just listening to your piece. It's about learning about the instruments. It's about learning about performers, about how they react to registers, about how they react to passages, about the psychology, how you mentioned. It's about a
Hmm.
lot of things. Like you
Well,
learn
and
a lot
good
about music through
ensembles
reading.
that are good at readings will usually provide feedback too for the
Yeah,
performers.
definitely. Yes.
Um, and they treat it as educational, and they'll explain why certain things are difficult on their instrument, or how or
Or not
why certain things are
practical.
confusing, or whatever the case is. Yeah, it's very educational.
I kind of went backwards the before because I mentioned that I was surprised how sometimes they will ask the composer like what he meant or what she meant, whatever. Like the intentionality behind a passage, the what is the intention, the what one wants, or how it should be done. Like they are out expecting you to have that answer, but no, I kind of like it's like I got ahead of that of the very
Yeah,
basic stuff. Like for students, it's like the performers, the experienced performers, are teaching them about the instruments, about how to use them properly,
experienced
correctly.
one. Yeah, and there's certainly like even in the professional world, there are certainly performers that are better at giving ratings than others for a variety of reasons. Like they're used to playing repertoire with similar techniques, or sometimes they're just they might be teachers themselves and are able to communicate their ideas effectively. Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm like, wow, I'm thinking about my time in Buffalo. I only had 2 readings in all of Buffalo, and neither were that successful. Um, my first one
Yeah,
was my
the first
sugar
one
test.
we shared the first one. It was a therapy
The
session.
ensemble, the ensemble did. I was fortunate enough that the ensemble did choose to redo mine, and they did do a good enough job. Like I used the recording successfully to get admitted to some festivals and things like that. So I was fortunate for that. But it took a while to get there. And then the second one was a piece. I think it was it was Nervat Neo, and I wrote a piece for flute and
What was
percussion and cello.
okay? I don't think I've heard that piece. Do you have a recording somewhere?
I have somewhere probably. I
But
should dig it out. But
you
it
don't
was
see it.
well
Seems like you didn't like it that much.
so the cellist that was normally with the group was, I think, got sick last minute, and they
Mhm.
had to travel with somebody else wasn't who didn't typically play contemporary music cello.
Mhm.
And I will say the flautist and um, the percussionist did a great job with the piece. The cellist did not, and so it was like it ended up kind of they were playing my piece, and then the cello was really just playing random sounds. That weren't really related to what
Yeah,
I wrote.
that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, but at least I did get some sense of it because 2 of the 3 musicians did do a very good job on the piece.
You got
Um,
two
so
thirds of the piece right.
yeah,
Um,
so
a good reading of two
yeah,
thirds. That's really nice. Oh my god.
but I think those are the only readings I was offered as a graduate student.
Hmm.
But I did a lot of work with musicians locally with the Crossfire duo. I actually wrote a piece with Zane as a guitarist. It was, I guess, last week I did a big collaboration with um, the Melanie Aceto, one of the dance professors. I worked
Now
with one
you're
of the
applying the
students.
definition as I
Um,
originally
I
applied
did
it.
a piece that was I played violin in the piece because Felder
What?
wanted me to I played I had a piece. It's my longest piece. It's named Fragility. Um, I wrote it. It's a 25-minute piece, it's the longest piece I've ever written by a lot. And I played violin in it because Felder specifically wanted me to play my own music, and he wanted me to play an instrument that I had no prerequisites for.
Is
Um,
that what you have? Why you have so many snap shot videos, like let's
no,
say social videos
I think
on your
that's actually
YouTube
for the
channel?
Nerbaten. I think it's for the Nerbaten Neo piece. I think it was a
Okay.
demonstration of some extended techniques for my
Okay.
pieces because David was trying to encourage me to go more towards like video um, video
A
performance
visual
notes.
video performance. Oh,
Yeah.
that
Um, Instead of describing a technique, which makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't know why that's
yes,
not common. Like, it just click on a link and see how it is. Um,
yeah. Huh.
so yeah, so he was trying to get me to do that. So that's those. I think those are actually referring that. But yeah, he wanted me to because oftentimes I make my performers feel very alienated. So he wanted me to experience the alienation, and he said that piece was for clarinet, flute, basically pure ensemble. It was pure ensemble. And he said that he didn't want me to play the flute or the clarinet
You said
because I was a wind
Pierrot,
player.
Pierrot,
Yeah, Piero
Pierrot is
ensemble. So
flute, clarinet,
just one
violin. Oh
mine
yes,
had
yes.
violin, viola, and cello.
Yeah, I remember. I didn't make it to the
So
deadline. we should talk about deadlines soon because I
So
was
that was all people that were Buffalo performers. Bill Loudon played the piano part. S.N. Gudez, who was one of our colleagues, played viola. Colin Tucker played the cello. I played the violin as a non-violinist because he wanted me to feel alienated and didn't want me to pick a wind part because he thought I had prerequisites for that as a brass player. And then it was like Lana and Chris who were musicians interested in contemporary music.
that
And
must
then
have been like 2013, 2014 or
no, it
so.
wasn't Colin Tucker. It was actually it was that was before. No, it was TJ. TJ did the cello actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah, it was 20. It might have been 2013 or 14. One of the two.
Yeah, I will guess so.
I think it was 2013. Um, it might have even been no. It might have even been 2012. To be honest, it might have even been 2012. It's one of those years.
Okay.
But yeah, so I mean, I did a lot in grad school with just the local performers, which a lot of it was because I wasn't offered a lot of readings. Did you do a lot of readings as a graduate student?
I don't remember that many. Not really. And like the Pierrot piece that you are referring to is like I was gonna do a reading with them, but I didn't meet the deadline. It was the only time I felt so bad. Oh my
Mine,
god!
I didn't,
But
I
I
didn't,
did
I didn't get the reading. I just had to make the ensemble from local players.
I
So
had
I
to
yeah,
like I remember getting for example a duo from the performers. I remember getting the flute ensemble for another performance. I remember
oh wow,
like going around and finding performers for my pieces or doing them
yeah,
at
me too.
festivals that I went around. I remember that first reading that you were referring to.
Yeah, string
Uh,
quartets, and then you had a guitar magnet, the Magnus Anderson one too, didn't you?
but that was for June in Buffalo, and that
Oh, it's
was
Juno Buffalo. Okay,
yeah, and that was a
he did one during
performance,
the year too.
and we went back and forth, and it was like, uh, okay. Some of it was the writing, okay, but it was kind of difficult. It was a lot of techniques. The idea behind that piece was to go throughout the different periods of guitar music playing and kind of meld them into one piece. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so it had this contrapuntal part, it has this tremolo part, it has lots of different parts, but um
I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah,
I mean, I guess
it
I
was
guess for me, like the readings, because I had the same experience as you, where I didn't have a lot of readings. I kind of pieced things together too, and I think it was intentional too, because I think I got more out of that than maybe I would of the readings. And the readings I did have, and as a graduate student, I don't think I got as much as the readings as I got when I was an undergraduate. And I
I
think it
remember
probably was just because I was
and
further in my development.
yeah, yeah, because what I remember another
Because
one. I had at
I
least
was
two and a third unrealized one, at least that I remember.
okay. Yeah,
So
I had like
not that
you
many
know
for being there for 5 years. Yeah,
yeah we usually tended to give. I had one my first year and I think one my third year, and that's it. And I was there 5 years too.
but regardless, it
Well,
was you
yeah.
had there were players there that were willing to play our music,
Oh, for
and that
sure.
was and we learned how to take advantage of that in that atmosphere. Like for example, and
Yeah.
that was cool. That was a cool experience, though. But would you consider those readings? It was more like training us to to do collaborations in a way.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I also. I guess because I didn't have any readings as a graduate student that were. I mean, I guess in retrospect, the string quartet one was successful, but it just took a long time to get there. It was I had the formalized reading day did not go well at all, and then the quartet was gracious enough for me to travel to them, and they spent some more time reading and recording the piece. And that was and so I did learn a lot like about working with them and communicating with them, and I was able to get a recording that was it did get me in really it was crucial for getting me in festivals as a graduate student. So I'm really thankful for that experience, but I wasn't.
I'm
It took me a
thinking,
while to get successful.
I'm thinking, and with the pieces afterwards, probably there was one solo guitar piece, and I didn't edit it that much. Probably a bit, but not as heavily as in grad school. And then there was this
Okay.
marimba piece that I wrote, and it was pretty much done. Like on the first reading, I didn't revise it or anything. I got recorded,
Yeah,
and
I didn't revise anything ever have done it and a formalized rating. I've never. I don't think I can't remember any ever revising the piece after.
hmm, I'm thinking, but
Like
now with the piece that I'm at right now, but with those pieces, let's say that I wasn't so obsessed as I was in grad school or now even like now I'm getting this obsession back with composition. That's I think I mentioned it to you, but and now I'm
with
revising
editing, you
more.
mean?
Huh?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
with editing and revising, yeah.
yeah. Right now with with the piece I'm trying to finish right now. But that's more like a back and forth between me and the performers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, it's always different too. Like, and I'm writing a piece right now for my friend Andrew Jamison, who'll be our guest next time, and I've known him since we met at Northwestern, and
mhm.
we've been like really close friends since. And he knows my music exceptionally well and knows my musical ideas exceptionally well, probably better than anybody. And I've actually found that my natural tendency because of that is to be lazy. Um, and like like my notations are initially sloppier because I'm like, he'll get that idea. I don't really need to communicate that much. And in my head, I'm like, shh. I used to want to be like, okay, I want to make this so that everybody can come and play this and we can get all these different performers. But in reality, I know that's not a huge likeliness. Um, but I am trying to get myself to step out of that. Like, okay, well, I do think he will get this, but like, maybe I should still do this. Like,
As a
wow.
score.
I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, they are scores, but just like some of my notations are like a little bit, I usually would have it much more cleaner and much more written out,
But
and much more clearly written out than,
I think I got the electric guitar piece fine by looking at it after a while. I don't know.
yeah, I
Do you
mean that
remember
piece,
your
yeah,
score?
but this is the synthesizer piece I'm working on, and it's very. I do find myself I'm going back and like revising it just because
Of that
I don't know.
aspect.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't, but I do find that like it's interesting that because I know him so exceptionally well, and I'm pretty sure that communicating my ideas to him is going to be much easier than I typically have. That I'm usually very meticulous in the way I communicate my material,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not as naturally meticulous. But I'm trying to like I'm trying not to. I keep having to tell myself, okay, wait, this is lazy. Um, let's just put the time into to making this sound, communicating this idea effectively, rather than just leaving it up to the collaboration, which would probably be fine, really. But um, it's just a
Let's see how it comes
whole
out.
different thing.
Let's
Yeah.
hope you have a record. It's gonna get recorded. I mean, it will probably get
Eventually,
recorded.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
I don't
I,
know the
I think
timeline of
that
it because
that's
he's
also
very
very
busy too.
important.
So, but
Uh-huh. I would
eventually.
I would say that that's very important to me. If it gets recorded in a more stable manner, let's say, or way in a way that it's out there, like the marimba piece, it got uh, composed, it was sent to the performer learned it, there was no revision involved there, and it
Hmm.
got released in it's on streaming platforms right now.
Hmm.
So I see that as final. So it's also about perception. It's also about
Hmm.
how finished you feel the piece is.
Yeah.
So for you, in a read for those reading sessions, the piece was finished. You finished it for those sessions.
Yeah. I mean, and the piece I'm writing on now, which is not it's not an untypical experience for how I work. I'm, working on a piece, and like the other day, he's been in town, so I was able to work on it with him. And, I make notes, and I'm sure I'll revise a ton based on that interaction and that experience.
Hmm.
And that's very typical, but I haven't written a final bar line. Um,
Okay. So
so,
it's still
yeah,
under construction, let's say.
it's still under construction. And like I worked with, like we talked about the crossfire. I work with crossfires that same way.
Yes,
The exam
me too.
even probably more so. Um, yeah, where I was constantly working with the players in progress, and I was constantly editing. Uh, but once like crossfires performed that piece, that was I've never edited it from then. Um,
Okay. I
I
might have done a little editing after a first performance with them, but it wasn't major. But at the same time, yeah, I see what you mean. I wouldn't do it right now. I just I
I mean,
even if it
I
were
think the
small
transformation
littles,
I think the
no.
transformation of the piece after the performance, I was more of a spectator to it, because it was more that they got more and more comfortable with the
Hmm.
piece, and
And
put
it
more and more
also
energy. And so that was fun to watch. But it wasn't me changing the piece. It just kind of, I think once I finished the piece, I think that's a very good way of putting it. Once I finished the piece, and I have a
it's
hard
not
time
yours.
finishing a piece.
Yes, yes,
It's
yes.
not
I
because
know what you mean.
I want it to be mine, and it is mine, and it's so deeply personal. But then once I give it to a player, I like give it to them, and I allow
It's
them to
already
have
out there. It's already out there. It's out of
a
your
life
hands.
with it. I allow them to interact with it. I allow them to have some of their own musicality and expression within the constructs of my piece. So I think, yes, I think after it's like I'm a spectator. I'm watching it have a life, but like with somebody else. Because I tend to write pieces most often for particular musicians. Um, and yeah, I write it with their mind, and those musicians then kind of have a little bit of a life with that piece. So yeah, I think that's probably part of it too, is that after the performance, I don't edit it because I sit back and I watch the development from
Do, do you have
the performers.
a date for the performance of this piece?
No, I mean, I had to finish writing it first. That's probably the first thing. So we'll see. I think in a very ideal world, he's in town like all of next month. That he would like to like have me finish it and learn it and perform it all in that time frame. I don't. I think it's very unlikely that that will happen.
Mhm.
Um, so likelihood, and he's moving out to Connecticut to start another master's. Um, so he, in likelihood, it probably will be pushed off for some time. Um, he does he does come back once or twice a year because his family is not too far from me. Um, he lives probably 45 minutes or something from where I live. So, or his parents do, not him. So he comes back and visits them a couple times a year, and a lot of times he'll try to put together shows in the city of Chicago while he's there. So perhaps, or sometimes Oak Park, where he's from too. So there sometimes, so perhaps one of those, but it probably will be a little bit, is what I'm guessing.
Okay, so
Um,
we'll see how much more do you revise from this piece, and I guess that we'll see how much more I will revise from my song, because
yeah,
after I get to revise it, then it will get up for I'll get to hear it somehow, and I'll probably go back to the editing room. Although I'm not
yeah.
that sure about that. I think that I kind of like it the way it is right now, but you never know. Is there anything else?
Are you still editing your song too, or is it complete?
Yeah, I'm still editing the song. I yeah, haven't finished
Yeah,
the revision, but after editing, I will have to listen to it to get a good grasp on what works. I think it kind of works, but like
yeah.
as I've mentioned to you, well, I
I
usually
mean,
wait until final statements after I listen to it on the whole as a whole, and then I
yeah.
can tell tell you with more precision if what's going to
I
happen.
mean, I think the final thing because I think we talked about some of our later experiences as a graduate student maybe being less helpful. I think because we were just further along in our development as composers and needed different things. But I will stress that I do think like readings are really really important to composers, especially young composers. I think it's like some of the best learning I ever had as a young composer were from reading sessions, and
Yeah, they can be
particularly
frustrating.
performers that were really particularly there are some performers that I've had that are just really good about um, feedback, and that's been really really important. It was really important to be able to have when I was very young. Sometimes that was the only time I got to hear my music played by others for these readings, and that just
Definitely.
I mean
In a way, they are like master classes from performers,
yeah, I mean yeah, I think
because they will
they're
scrutinize
very
your music.
important.
They will scrutinize your passages. They will tell you that
Yeah,
this doesn't work. This you must do away with this passage, or do away with this, not section usually, but this passage, or this, that you're what you're
yeah,
trying to do is not practical, or I can do it, but most other performers won't
yeah.
do it for
I
you,
mean, and
and stuff
just
like that.
because
Some of them are very blunt, so the teaching experience that you get from those are
yeah, I
really
mean, but
useful.
just because there's like some reading experiences are difficult, I feel like anybody who's in a position of teaching should really put priority in creating reading opportunities for their students, especially those who teach, you
Composition.
know, young composers, even young graduate students. I think it's really important, and I think students who have an opportunity to participate in the reading should eagerly take that experience and
Yeah,
take it as put as much effort and take it in seriously, because the amount of effort that you put in is like what you'll get out ultimately.
you'll definitely learn more about the instruments there than from MIDI or from trying to imagine them in
Oh
your ear.
yeah,
That's for sure.
it's amazing, and as a teacher it's really fun to see because my students are all you know young, writing their first or second piece, and they're all
Hmm.
um, middle school, early high school right now, and so it's just the amount of energy and excitement because it's just a totally new experience is I feed off of it too. Like I see their excitement and I get really excited for them. And it
Of
brings back
course.
experience I
Yeah,
had
of
that were
course.
similar when I was younger. So yeah, it's very cool.
So you create opportunities for your students in, when you can, or
Yeah,
that's pretty awesome.
I try. I mean,
If you can
I'm
experience
thankful
them,
for.
uh-huh.
I'm thankful for all the opportunities I've been given, even the ones that didn't turn out great, like the reading sessions that, my 2/3 reading session and
Hmm.
my, string quartet that took a couple tries. Like I still learned so much from those experiences.
Yeah, I
I
will
mean,
say so
yeah.
too. And not you don't have to learn in a positive way. You can learn from the failures. You can learn from what doesn't work. You can learn from the
Hmm.
impasses. From what you cannot come along, like reach an agreement between performer and composer, because that's also another thing. Reaching an agreements at times, because you will say you can do this. That's possible. I know it. But some performer will say, that's too hard. It There's a million different situations that can happen at those readings. uh,
Yeah.
and you are working with professional, well, in the sense that if they are formal readings, you are working with professionals that have been doing this for a while usually. So it's it's kind of like a middle ground
Well,
there.
and
Yeah,
as a young composer, I remember how, like, especially when I remember as a young undergraduate, we'd have this professional musician come in, and you were expected to lead the readings and ask the players questions and ask them to play something in different manners. And it's very confidence building. You have to kind of develop more confidence in what you're doing and yourself as a musician, because in my head is I was like 19. I'm like, why, yeah, like I am, why should these musicians that are, in much older than I am with much more experience than I am look like take the advice that I'm giving them. I'm like,
even if
what kind
it's
of
something
authority do
like
I have?
tempo, like please play it
Yeah.
faster, because if you play it at that speed, it doesn't work. At least it's not for my ear. And even if they give you the
Yeah,
look,
so
it gives you some confidence in that
yeah,
sense.
I mean I think and for me, like trying to kind of learn the confidence to be able to interact with performers in those reading sessions really not only give me confidence to work with other performers, but like gave me confidence in my own music and my artistic direction. They're just yeah, it was just it was an important professional experience as well.
Yeah, it kind of prepares you to stand up for your music when nobody else will, to put it
Yeah.
in a way. And sometimes you have to do it. Most of the time, you have to do it as a composer of new music, because
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
you
and
are
it's
the
hard for young
person.
composers to be confident. I think I'm usually very confident about what I produce and hand to players now because I've put a lot of work and effort and I've studied very hard and I really put a ton of work to make it that way, and I feel confidence in that. But that wasn't necessarily true.
When you were
Maybe
18,
yeah, I
19,
wasn't true when I was
20,
18, 19, 20. I mean, even if my first year of grad school, I think I was a lot less confident. Um,
we all were the same. Well,
yeah.
yeah. No, it's something you build up, and out of experience, out of these experiences too,
Hmm.
because I told you about the impasses, but those impasses are very important, because you learn when to see it, when you see that what the performers are asking is more than reasonable, or they are on the right, or and when you learn to differentiate when what they are asking is totally doable, it's just because they don't want to. Like it's like. Uh,
Hmm.
a thing of practicality or of doability, etc., etc. then
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this conversation has yielded more points that I was planning on discussing, and
Yeah,
I
me
think
too.
that we a lot to think about uh, on a lot of things. Home, but anyway, we're well over the
Yes.
hour mark. Do you
Yes.
wanna say something else
I think
to finish this?
I've communicated. How about you?
No, I think I'm good. Like at least for now, we can do a second part with Shunting and about his
Yeah.
experiences. Like let's see when he comes back. Um,
Yeah.
well, that will be it for today. So tonight,
Yeah.
be safe,
Night.
man. Ciao.
Bye.